All right, everyone, get ready for a deep dive. Today, it's Genesis chapter 16 from the King James Version of the Bible. You guys sent this in, and wow, family drama, ancient customs, even divine intervention, all packed into one chapter.
It's quite a story, that's for sure. We're starting right off with Abram and Sarai. Still can't have children.
And their solution, well, let's just say it creates a whole bunch of new problems.
Yeah, they go for a pretty, unconventional approach, at least by today's standards.
It was common back then, though, right? Sarai suggests Abram take Hagar, her maidservant, as a second wife.
Right, so they could have children through Hagar, and you can immediately see how this sets the stage for some serious tension.
Oh, absolutely. Imagine the power dynamics at play here. You've got Sarai, the mistress of the house, and Hagar, her servant.
And suddenly, Hagar is carrying the heir, a huge shift in their social order.
Talk about a mind-blowing situation for Hagar. One minute she's a servant, the next she's carrying the child who will inherit everything.
Yeah, I mean, how could that not change how she sees herself? And the text even says she starts to disrespect Sarai.
I mean, in that situation, is anyone really surprised? But then we see Sarai's reaction, and it's intense. She blames Abram, saying, "My wrong be upon thee."
Talk about a plot twist.
Yeah.
It's her idea in the first place, but I guess when it backfires.
Yeah, it seemed like a good idea at the time.
Right. But now she feels betrayed and displaced. And remember, back then, infertility carried a huge social stigma. So Sarai's offering Hagar as a solution was her trying to fulfill her duty as a wife. And now,
She's the one who feels wronged. So where does Abram fit into all of this? What does he do when Sarai confronts him?
not much, honestly. He basically tells her to deal with it herself.
Oof, not exactly a supportive spouse, huh?
It really highlights the power dynamics of the time. Abram was the patriarch, head of the household, and honestly, he comes across as pretty emotionally detached, more concerned with the heir than with the women involved. Yeah.
So we've got Sarai simmering with resentment, Hagar trying to navigate this whole new power dynamic, and Abram, well, he's not exactly winning any Husband of the Year awards. What happens next?
Well, things escalate pretty quickly. Sarai starts mistreating Hagar, and she ends up fleeing into the wilderness, pregnant and alone.
Wow, it sounds like a desperate move running away like that. But I guess when you feel trapped, sometimes you just have to run.
Absolutely. It's a leap of faith into the unknown.
Definitely. Okay, so now we've got this pregnant woman alone in the wilderness. This is where things get interesting. This is where the divine comes in, right?
You got it. Hagar, exhausted and vulnerable, encounters the angel of the Lord at a spring in the wilderness.
Hold on. The angel of the Lord. Who are we talking about here?
Right, so this isn't just any angel. This is often interpreted as a manifestation of God himself, or at least a being directly representing God's will.
Okay, so this is a big deal. God stepping onto the scene. And this isn't just a comforting pep talk, right? The angel gives Hagar some pretty specific instructions.
Yeah, but first he asks her two really profound questions. Hagar, Sarai's maid, whence camest thou? And whither wilt thou go? He's making her think about her actions, her choices. Like, stop running, let's take a look at your life. It's a powerful moment.
It's like a divine wake-up call. Okay, so what does the angel tell her to do?
Well, he tells her to return to Sarai and submit to her. Which might sound harsh, but remember, this was a patriarchal society.
Right, Hagar running away was a pretty big challenge to the established social order, so she has to go back. But,
and here's the crucial part, she also gets an amazing promise.
that changes everything, right?
Totally. The angel tells her she'll have a son, Ishmael, and his descendants will be too numerous to count. This is about more than just Hagar's future. This is about a whole nation being born, a people who will inherit God's covenant.
You keep mentioning this covenant. Can you just quickly remind us what that means in this context?
Sure. A covenant is a binding agreement between God and his people. So with this promise to Hagar, it's like we're seeing an echo of the covenant God made with Abram. You know, where God promised him descendants as numerous as the stars.
Right. I remember that. Okay, so Hagar gets this promise, and her response is so moving. Thou, God, seest me. It's like, in all this, she finally feels seen and acknowledged.
Exactly. And think about it. She's an Egyptian woman, a foreigner, a servant, but God sees her, hears her, and makes a covenant with her.
Wow. It really makes you think, doesn't it? So armed with this promise and this new sense of being seen by God, Hagar heads back to Sarai. What happens next?
Well, that's where things get even more complicated. And that's what we'll get into right after this.
Hold on, no breaks this time. Let's just keep going. What happens when Hagar gets back? Does the baby's arrival change anything?
Oh, there's plenty of drama to come. Having Ishmael doesn't magically solve the issues at play here. Actually, it kind of makes things even more complicated.
Okay, I'm hooked. Tell me more.
Well, keep in mind the bigger picture. God promised Abram all those descendants.
Right. And so far, all he has is Ishmael. And he's not the heir Sarai had in mind.
Exactly. So this sets up a really complicated family dynamic. And as we'll see later on, Sarai eventually has her own son, Isaac. And let me tell you, the rivalry between those two sons, well, it echoes through generations.
Wow, okay. So even though God fulfilled his promise, at least in a way, things are just getting started.
Oh, yeah. This chapter is just the beginning. It feels like we've just opened the first page of an epic saga.
And it's all about faith, family, betrayal, the consequences of choices made generations ago.
And the commentary reminds us that while it's a story packed with religious teachings, it's also a captivating human drama.
Absolutely. These ancient texts, they aren't just relics from the past. They're living stories that still resonate with us today, offering these amazing insights into what it means to be human.
Precisely. And as we keep exploring Genesis, we'll see how everything unfolds, the choices people make, divine intervention, all shaping their destinies, and the course of history itself.
Okay, before we wrap up, let's go back to what our listener wanted us to focus on. Hagar's statement, "Thou God seest me." What are your thoughts on that, given everything we've talked about?
Well, it's a powerful statement, isn't it? It speaks to that need we all have to be seen, to be acknowledged, to know we're not alone. Hagar, running away from all that human conflict, realizes she can't run from God.
Like she's finding a whole new level of faith, not just rituals and rules, but this direct personal connection to the divine.
Absolutely. And it's a faith that's formed in the middle of her suffering, a faith that says God is there even in the darkest times.
And I think that's something so many people can relate to. It doesn't matter what your background is. We all have those moments when we feel lost or alone.
Exactly. And the Hagar story, it reminds us that even then we're not truly alone. God sees us, hears us, and walks with us through it all.
That's a beautiful thought. So, listener, keep that in mind as you read or reread this amazing chapter. Think about Hagar's words, "Thou God seest me." What does that mean to you? When do you feel seen? When do you feel invisible? And what does it mean to be truly known by something greater than ourselves?
Such great questions. And remember, faith isn't always easy. There will be doubts and fears.
But Hagar's story, it's a reminder that even when things are hard, we're never truly alone.
Exactly.
All right, so we left off with Hagar heading back to Abram and Sarai, carrying this incredible promise and this newfound awareness that God sees her. But I'm guessing things don't just magically go back to normal, do they?
Not quite. I mean, yeah, it says that Hagar's experience humbled her and that she returned to Sarai and things were a bit more peaceful, but let's be real.
Right, the core issues are still there.
Exactly. Sarai is still dealing with her own stuff, her insecurities, her disappointments, and now Hagar's walking around with this monumental promise, like a constant reminder of everything Sarai doesn't have.
It's a powder keg, just waiting to explode.
You could say that. And as we read on, we see this tension doesn't just go away. It really shapes the destinies of both their sons.
Okay, so lots more to come there. But before we move on, you mentioned some commentary that offered an interesting perspective on this whole situation.
Yeah, the commentary really digs into the theology and the morality of the story. I mean, yeah, this kind of arrangement was culturally acceptable back then, but...
That created a whole mess of problems.
Absolutely. The commentary actually uses the phrase manifold uneasiness.
Wow, yeah. That is the perfect way to describe it.
Right, manifold uneasiness. And the commentary points out something really interesting. Sarai, even though she was the one who came up with this whole plan, ends up putting all the blame on Abram.
So much for taking responsibility, huh?
Right. And I think it shows how pride and resentment can really mess with our judgment.
Well, they were human, right? Even these biblical figures, they make mistakes, they get things wrong.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the commentary even points out that Hagar wasn't totally innocent either. She was the one who started disrespecting Sarai in the first place.
Yeah, it's not so black and white. There's fault on both sides.
Exactly. Nobody comes out of this looking perfect. And I think that's part of what makes this story so powerful. It feels real.
Yeah, I get that. It shows how complex human relationships can be, especially in families.
Definitely. Okay, so the commentary acknowledges the human failings, but it also highlights that encounter Hagar has with the angel as this key moment of divine intervention.
Right. Can you unpack that a little more?
Well, the commentary focuses on the idea of mercy. Like, sometimes we need to be stopped in our tracks when we're going down the wrong path, whether it's our own conscience that stops us or like with Hagar, a divine encounter.
It makes you wonder, right? Like, how many times have we narrowly avoided making a bad decision?
Totally. And maybe it was just a gut feeling, or something happened that threw us off course, but something stepped in and said, nope, not that way.
And for Hagar, that redirection meant going back to a tough situation. But now she's got this promise, this knowledge that God sees her and has a plan.
It's a message of hope, of resilience.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting. The angel who delivers this promise is called the Eternal Word and Son of God, which is a huge deal, theologically speaking.
Oh, wow. Okay. I have to admit, I'm not familiar with that interpretation.
Yeah, it gets a bit complex. But basically, this title links the angel of the Lord to Jesus. Like, even back in the Old Testament, we're seeing hints of this divine figure who shows up later in the New Testament.
So cool. I'm going to have to go back and reread everything with this new perspective.
It's amazing, right? These ancient texts have so much depth. You can read them over and over and always find new insights.
Okay, so we've got the theological significance. But the commentary also points out that Hagar's experience changes her behavior. She goes back to Sarai with more humility, and Sarai treats her better because of it.
It's not a perfect happy ending, but the dynamic shifts. It shows that even in really tough circumstances, people can change, they can grow.
Hagar goes through this intense wilderness experience, this divine encounter, and it refines her, makes her more resilient, better able to deal with whatever comes next.
And isn't that something we all go through? Trials and tribulations, feeling lost, but those times can shape us, make us stronger.
So powerful. Okay, but let's not forget, Hagar is still pregnant.
Sure.
What happens when the baby arrives?
Well, the birth of Ishmael changes everything. His very name means God has heard. But the story's far from over. Remember, this is all part of a bigger narrative. What about God's promise to Abram? Descendants as numerous as the stars.
Right, right. And so far, Ishmael's the only son he has.
And he's not the son Sarai was hoping for. So this sets the stage for a whole lot of family drama. Down the line, Sarai has her own son, Isaac. And then the rivalry between those two sons, it's huge. It has repercussions for generations.
So this chapter is really just the tip of the iceberg.
Totally. And the commentary reminds us that this story, while filled with religious teachings, is also this gripping human drama.
It's a story about family, about power, and how the past can influence the present. And the commentary helps us understand the different layers of meaning in this story.
Exactly. So much to unpack, so much to think about. And honestly, I think we could talk about this chapter for hours.
Oh, for sure. But for now, we need to wrap things up. So, listener, we want to leave you with a final thought, something to ponder as you continue reading Genesis. Think about that statement from Hagar. Thou, God, seest me. What does that mean to you? How does it resonate with your own life?
When do you feel seen? And when do you feel invisible? It's a question worth asking ourselves, especially in today's world.
That's a powerful note to end on. We'll be back next time with another deep dive into a new chapter. So until then, keep seeking, keep questioning, keep learning.
And keep diving deep.
So, wow, we covered a lot of ground. Jealousy, power struggles, divine intervention, and a promise that's going to have huge implications down the line, all in one chapter.
It's remarkable how much this story packs in. And it really gets you thinking about, well, about human nature, about faith, our relationship with God. It's like this little snapshot of the human experience.
And it's only the beginning, right? We've got the whole story of Ishmael and Isaac coming up.
Yeah.
And all the consequences of God's covenant with both Abram and Hagar. It feels like we've just started this epic journey.
I think that's a great way to put it. The Bible is so fascinating because it's not just a bunch of separate stories. It's all connected. This grand narrative of human history and God's interaction with humanity.
Before we wrap up, I want to circle back to something we touched on earlier. Hagar's statement, thou God seest me. It's so powerful. What are your final thoughts on that?
You know, for me, it highlights something we all crave, that sense of being seen, being acknowledged, knowing we're not alone. Hagar, she's running away from all this human conflict, but she realizes she can't outrun God.
It's like she's discovering this whole new dimension of faith, one that's not about rituals or rules, but about a real personal connection with God.
Exactly. And it's a faith that's born in the middle of her suffering. It says, even when things are hard, God is still there.
And that's something that speaks to everyone, I think. No matter your background, we all have times when we feel lost, alone, forgotten.
Absolutely. And Hagar's story, it reminds us that in those times, we're not truly alone. God sees us, hears us, and walks with us through it all.
That's a really comforting thought. So, listener, as you continue reading or maybe rereading Genesis, remember those words, thou God seest me. What do they mean to you? When do you feel most seen? When do you feel invisible? And what does it mean to be truly known by God? It's something to think about.
Yeah, those are some great questions to reflect on.
Well, that brings us to the end of another deep dive.
It's been a pleasure exploring this chapter with you.
Same here. And to all our listeners out there, thanks for joining us. Keep those questions coming. We'll be back soon to dive into another fascinating topic. Until then, keep seeking, keep questioning, keep learning,
And keep diving deep.